Ngara lay cradled between two great mountains, their dark slopes rising like the bent backs of ancient gods. The wind there always carried a thirst, and the cracked earth below whispered for water even in sleep. Crops grew thin and brittle, and the river that once coiled around the village like a silver snake had turned into a lazy stream, coughing dust. Rain was a stranger to Ngara, and so, the people made stories of it, stories that gave shape to their desperation, that made sense of the sky's silence. They said storms were not just clouds and water, but the restless cries of women wronged. Women who died with tears still burning behind their eyes, whose voices were swallowed by thunder. And when the sky finally broke and rain poured down, it was their sorrow falling, not mercy. Every drop a lament. Every flash of lightning a scream they hadn't been allowed to release in life. To be born during such a storm was a bad omen. To survive it was worse. The night Malika was born, the wind tore through the banana groves like it had a mouth, and the clouds roared louder than drums. Her mother's cries tangled with the thunder, or rising, gut-deep howl that made even the bravest men clutch their wives and shut their windows. When the morning came, her mother's body lay soaked and still, her eyes open and filled with sky. But the baby had lived. Her breath, shallow and soft, steamed in the cold air as if the storm had kissed her and left her glowing. The elders gathered around the corpse and the child, and none of them smiled. One whispered, "She is not alone in that skin." Another said, "She carries her mother's last scream." But it was the oldest woman, with eyes like burnt coal and a spine twisted like a question, who gave her the name Malika, queen, and declared, "Let no one raise her but the earth and what it leaves behind." So, she was given to her grandmother, a silent woman who lived on the edge of the village in a hut surrounded by drying herbs and clay jars. She raised Malika not with lullabies, but with stories scratched into dirt and warnings murmured into wind. The village children were told not to play near her. She smells like lightning, they were warned. She brings storms. Malika grew among shadows and silence. She learned to listen more than she spoke. She knew the taste of ash, the sharp scent of incoming rain, the way thunder echoed differently when you were alone. In the eyes of the villagers, she was always a little too still, a little too dark, a little too much like a question the sky had asked and never answered. They called her cursed. They called her touched. But no one called her child. And so, Malika belonged not to them, but to the storm that had screamed her into being. At 16, Malika moved through the world like something borrowed from another realm, half-rooted in soil, half-swirled in cloud. She was tall for her age, wiry as a reed, with skin the color of rain-wet bark. Her eyes had the stillness of deep water, but behind them swam something older, something unspeaking. Most days she walked barefoot through the grass that curled around her ankles like vines trying to hold her still. And always, she carried a clay bowl, thin and pale as bone, made by her grandmother and used only for one thing, collecting stormwater. It wasn't just rain she gathered. It had to be the first water, the early drops that hit the earth when the sky was still trembling and unsure. She would stand outside before anyone else, hands outstretched, bowl raised to the clouds, eyes closed. She never flinched at thunder. Never blinked at lightning. She treated the storm like it was speaking directly to her. And when the rain came, she would dip her fingers into it, whisper into the bowl, and pour it into small jars she hid around the outskirts of the village. The villagers watched her with unease. The boys laughed and called her rain hag or sky's wife, teasing that her hair had never been dry since the day she was born. It was true, her tight black coils always glistened with dampness, even in the hottest droughts. No fire ever burned near her hut without sputtering. The girls were more quiet in their judgments. They would huddle and whisper, eyes darting, mouths bent with worry. "She talks to things that don't talk back," one would say. "She listens too long to silence," another would murmur. Malika ignored them all. She had long since learned that people feared what they couldn't name. And she had never named herself. She didn't quite know what she was either. Only that something pulsed under her skin when the sky darkened, and her heart beat differently when thunder rolled across the mountaintops. On those days, she felt closest to something she could almost recognize but never hold, like chasing the scent of rain before it fell. Her only true companion was Arrow, a boy with soft hands and a quiet laugh who never looked at her like she was broken. Years ago, when they were children, Arrow had slipped into the swollen river while fetching reeds. The current had pulled him under, and his screams had vanished beneath the roar of the flood. No one saw him go, except Malika. She had run into the water without a word, her thin body cutting through the current like it knew the river's secret path. When she pulled Arrow out, coughing and blue-lipped, she said nothing. Just pressed her forehead to his and whispered, "Breathe like thunder." Slow and loud. He never forgot that. Since then, he stayed close, not too close to raise eyebrows, but enough that Malika didn't always feel like a ghost among the living. They sat often under the baobab tree near the fields, where the wind spoke in leaf tongues and the sun fractured through the branches. Arrow would bring her stolen mangoes or a carved piece of wood, and Malika would let him talk. He never asked about the stormwater. He never mocked the jars. He simply existed beside her, which was more than most people had ever done. Lately, though, something had begun to shift inside her. At night, she dreamed of clouds that bled red. Of voices that called her by names she didn't know, in languages she hadn't learned. The wind in those dreams was warm and humming, and somewhere inside it was a laugh, a woman's, deep and broken and endless. She would wake with her heart rattling in her chest, her ears still ringing with the echo of that laugh. Was it her mother? Was it the storm itself? Or something older than either? One night, the dream changed. She stood in the center of the village, but the huts were gone, replaced by endless sky and cracked earth. Above her, the clouds churned like angry animals. And from them, a voice thundered, low and clear, "You are not made of skin. You are made of sky." When she woke, her sheets were damp, though no rain had fallen. Malika began speaking back to the storm, not just in whispers but in full voice. When the wind howled, she replied. When thunder rumbled, she answered. She wasn't asking for rain anymore. She was asking for memory. For truth. For whatever blood ran in her veins that made lightning feel like a pulse. And sometimes, when no one else was around, the sky seemed to pause for her, just long enough to listen. The sun grew meaner with each passing day, baking the earth until it cracked like old skin. The fields turned brittle, the cornstalks slumped in surrender, and the yam vines shriveled before they could root deep. Chickens wandered aimlessly, pecking at dry patches of ground where insects no longer dared to crawl. The river, once a thin but dependable ribbon of silver, was now a path of stones coated in the memory of water. Ngara, always hungry for rain, was now starving. People began to speak in the way frightened people do, in whispers, in riddles, in blame. Mothers stared at their children's hollowed eyes and asked what sins they had not yet confessed. Old men lifted their hands toward the sky, mouths trembling with forgotten prayers. Even the elders, usually wrapped in their certainty, started pacing in their council hut at night. Their chants grew longer. Their offerings of smoked goat and millet cakes sat untouched by even the flies. Nothing came down. Not a drop. The drought had gnawed its way into the bones of Ngara, and when the earth suffers long enough, it makes people cruel. In the middle of the village, beside the dry well, the elders gathered one afternoon. Their faces were hard, their jaws stiff as if clenching against panic. Elder Tephew, whose voice always shook like he was still speaking through storm wind, struck the staff against the ground 3 times. The villagers stopped. Silence pealed through the crowd. The rain spirits, he said, are displeased. People shifted. No one dared speak. We have prayed, he continued, and we have been ignored. We have offered food, dance, chants. Nothing. The ancestors have gone silent. This is not weather. This is punishment. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Something, he said, or someone, must be cleansed. No one asked who. Not yet. But everyone knew what those words meant. Ngara had done it before, in the worst drought 3 generations ago. When the rains failed, they had taken a man accused of sorcery and buried him beneath the old fig tree, throat packed with salt. Rain came 3 days later. Coincidence, maybe. But people do not remember coincidence. They remember survival. This time, they wouldn't wait until starvation took the youngest. They would act. Inside the elder hut, as the sky bruised purple and the village feigned sleep, names were whispered. Most were rejected. Too young. Too old. Too useful. But one name lingered. One name returned like a stubborn ghost. Malika. She is stormborn, Elder Tephew said, his voice low. Her mother died screaming in the rain. Her presence sours the sky. She speaks to thunder, said another. She walks where animals do not tread. She is not one of us. The decision was made without ceremony. The rain spirits must be shown humility. Ngara must show it had the courage to cut out its own rot. The offering would happen at the next crescent moon. 4 days. Outside, in the tall grass beyond the last hut, Arrow crouched, hidden in the dark. He hadn't meant to hear. He'd only followed the faint light of the elder's fire, curious. He hadn't expected to make out words through the thin reed walls, but the wind, ever a trickster, had delivered them perfectly. Malika. Sacrifice. Cleanse. His breath hitched in his throat. His stomach turned cold. He remembered the river. The silence after he slipped under. The grip of panic as the world became water. And then her, arms thin but strong, eyes furious, dragging him back like she wasn't afraid of drowning. She hadn't spoken for hours afterward. Just sat beside him, dripping and watching the river as though daring it to take him again. And now these same people, these ones who never looked her in the eyes, who taught their children to cross the path when she walked by, they would bind her and call it holy. He stood slowly, knees aching, and slipped back into the dark. His mind churned. He knew he couldn't tell anyone. Not his mother, who feared Malika like a shadow on her back. Not the elders, who would silence him before he opened his mouth. And not Malika herself. What would he even say? They're going to kill you. Because you exist. Because you remind them of the rain they don't understand. The next morning, Malika was by the grove, collecting fallen leaves and arranging them into strange patterns in the dirt. She didn't look up when Arrow approached. Didn't speak. But when he sat down beside her, she said, without turning her head, "The storm told me something last night." He blinked. What did it say? She pressed her fingers into the soil, drawing a spiral. It said thunder doesn't ask permission to arrive. Arrow swallowed. His hands curled into fists, and he bit down the words trying to claw out of his throat. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she had always known. Still, he stayed beside her, watching her fingertips draw symbols the rain might understand. For days, he thought. For days before they call her a gift to gods who never asked for her. For days before they try to cleanse what they never took time to understand. The wind that morning tasted of metal and dust. A strange stillness sat heavy over Ngara, as if even the insects dared not speak. Sky above wore a deep gray cloak, rolling clouds curling like fists, coiled and waiting. Every villager felt it, something coming, something old. But the sacred hill, bare and waiting, had been prepared long before the first tremble in the clouds. Drums sounded at dawn, hollow and slow. Not celebratory. Not festive. This rhythm was older. A funeral beat worn into the bones of the land. Women smeared ash on their cheeks, and men wrapped themselves in dried grasses and red cloth. The elders painted lines down their faces in charcoal and clay, each stroke a prayer they didn't dare speak aloud. Today was not a day for questions. It was a day for obedience. Malika was taken from her grandmother's hut before the sun could rise. 4 women entered, silent, eyes lowered. Her grandmother wept without sound, her hands pressed to her own mouth, body rocking like a tree in a wind she could not stop. Malika did not fight. She stood as they bound her wrists with woven twine and led her barefoot through the village. People gathered along the path like mourners at a wedding. Children clutched their mothers, wide-eyed and confused. Adults looked away. Only a few watched openly, those who believed deeply in the curse and those who craved the satisfaction of seeing fear humbled. She walked slowly, steadily, not struggling as her feet touched the dry soil of the hill. Her eyes searched the crowd once, for Arrow. And found him. Half hidden behind a row of baskets, his face pale, hands shaking. Their eyes locked. He did not speak. He did not move. The hill, known as Mbali's Rise, had been sacred long before Ngara had huts. It was said to be the place where the sky first kissed the earth and fire first wept. No one lived on it. No one farmed there. And no one climbed it unless the ancestors demanded. At the summit stood a pole, carved from lightning-struck wood, blackened at the base but smoothed by wind and time. It was this pole they tied her to. Rough hands stripped away her dress, tearing it with careless efficiency until nothing remained but her skin and the sky above. The villagers below gasped, some in pity, most in approval. To offer a body to the storm, it must be as bare as its birth. Mockery followed, disguised as ritual. They smeared her arms with white chalk, poured stale water over her head. Someone laughed when she winced at the cold. Another spat toward her feet. She remained silent, jaw locked, her shoulders squared though her body trembled. Arrow watched, every nerve in his body screaming to move, to shout, to run to her side. But his legs would not obey. His feet were stone. His voice drowned by the roaring silence in his ears. The boy who owed her his life, who had eaten from her hands and listened to her stories, stood and watched while the village bared her to the sky. Thunder rolled in the distance, slow and deep. A warning. The elders stepped back. The wind picked up. This offering, Elder Tephu shouted, is given with clean hands and humbled hearts. Let the sky take what is owed, and return what we have lost. Another thunderclap, closer now. The clouds had thickened into a boiling wall of darkness, folding over the horizon. A whip of lightning tore across the sky like a sword being drawn. Fear took root. Women clutched their children tighter. Men exchanged nervous glances. The wind turned violent, swirling dust into stinging spirals. The sacred cloth tied to the offering pole flapped wildly. Malika's hair whipped across her face, but she did not cry out. Not yet. Then the storm arrived. It came with a scream, a shriek not of wind, but of something vast and furious, something ancient and violated. The sky cracked wide open. Rain slammed down in fat, angry drops. Lightning flashed again, close enough to make people stagger. The pole sparked at its base. Panic broke the ritual. One by one, the villagers turned and fled, some stumbling, some screaming. The sacred ceremony scattered like leaves before a gust. Only the elders remained for a moment longer, shouting for calm, for discipline. But when the third bolt struck a nearby tree and split it in two, even Elder Tephu ran, his robe soaked and sagging, his chant forgotten. Arrow stood frozen. He could see her still, tied to the pole, eyes wide, hair plastered to her face, her chest rising in shallow bursts. She turned to him again, one last time. And again, he did nothing. When the last footsteps faded and the drums fell silent, only Malika remained. The hill around her had turned to mud. Her feet sank into the soft earth, her body racked with cold. Rain poured from the sky with relentless fury, each drop like a judgment. She sobbed then, not with the helplessness of a child, but the fury of someone betrayed not by strangers, but by those she once dreamed could be her people. Her voice cracked as she cried out, head thrown back, mouth open to the sky. If I die tonight, she whispered, choking on her own breath, let me be the last. Her words rose into the storm and disappeared in its roar. Above, the thunder answered. The storm swallowed the world. Rain came down in sheets, soaking Malika's skin until she could no longer tell where her body ended and the sky began. Wind howled like a wounded animal around her, rattling the offering pole with each angry gust. Her breath came in ragged bursts, her muscles ached from holding upright, and the cold had long since burrowed deep into her bones. She no longer cried. There were no tears left in her. Only silence. Only rain. Then, light. It came not as a flash but as an explosion, a scream of light from above, tearing a path through the black clouds and striking the pole dead center. Everything went white. For a breathless moment, Malika felt nothing. No pain. No sound. Just brightness, wrapped around her like fire without flame. Her body lifted, maybe only an inch, maybe more, but it felt like flying. Her limbs loosened in their bindings. The cord smoked. Her heart stopped. Then it roared back to life. A pulse. A voice. A sound she could not name thudded inside her chest. Her vision swam in color, not just white, but violet, gold, electric blue. It felt like 1,000 hands pressed against her spine, holding her up and pushing her forward all at once. A voice, huge, feminine, layered with thunder, spoke into the pit of her skull, into the marrow of her bones. "You are mine now." The sound wasn't heard so much as felt. It vibrated through the cords wrapped around her wrists, through her ribs, down her legs. It filled every hollow space inside her until nothing remained untouched. Heat bloomed beneath her skin. Not the kind of fire that burned, but a living warmth, fierce and consuming. It spread from her chest to her fingers, to her toes, to her scalp. Her hair stood on end. Her back arched. She was no longer cold. The cords holding her snapped, not unraveling, but igniting into embers that drifted up into the storm, vanishing into the night like regrets finally released. Malika collapsed to her knees, coughing, her fingers clawing into the mud. The wind eased. The rain continued, but now it felt different, softer, more deliberate. It was touching her, not punishing her. She rose slowly, one breath at a time, as if she was relearning what it meant to move. Her feet sank into the earth, but she was not weak. When she opened her eyes, they were no longer brown. They had turned silver, deep, shining, and alive with the memory of lightning. She blinked, and the storm blinked with her. Malika looked down at her hands. They shimmered faintly, wet and trembling, but strong. She raised her palm to the sky, and the wind bent toward it. Rain bent with it. The voice returned, quieter this time, but closer. "Walk." So she did. Naked, soaked, hair clinging to her shoulders, she stepped down from Bali's rise. With each step, the storm dimmed just slightly, as if following her, adjusting itself to her pace. Thunder rumbled behind her like a drumbeat. Trees bowed their limbs. The earth felt less like a stranger and more like a companion. As she descended the hill, lightning flashed again, but not in the sky. It pulsed in her veins. She moved without urgency. Her body ached, but her spirit had awakened into something vast. She was no longer a girl. Not a curse. Not a sacrifice. She was something reborn. A creature of rain and sky and fury. By the time she reached the edge of the village, the storm was quiet again, reduced to mist and memory. The huts lay dark and silent. Everyone had scattered. No chance remained. No fire burned. Only the mud-slick paths and the whispers of thunder far in the distance. Malika stepped barefoot through it all. Not hidden. Not broken. She had been stripped beneath the sky. And the sky had given her something in return. Morning broke with the scent of wet earth and the glistening hush of rebirth. The drought, once thought eternal, had been undone in a single night. Fields that had begged for mercy now drank deeply from the rain's generous hand. Water filled the wells to their brims, overflowing and pooling into the dusty cracks of the village paths. The parched soil steamed gently beneath the sun, exhaling relief into the air. Villagers stepped out of their huts in disbelief, blinking against the light, their skin still damp from the storm's fury. Women ran to their gardens and fell to their knees, laughing as they pressed their fingers into soft, fertile mud. Children splashed in puddles, shrieking with joy. Men shouted across courtyards, calling the miracle by name, "The rain has returned." But then someone saw her. At the far edge of Ngara, near the gate where thornbrush met the path leading to Mbali's rise, she stood. Malika. Soaked, barefoot, skin gleaming like polished obsidian. Her long limbs were streaked with mud and ash. Her hair clung to her face in black ropes, but her back was straight, her jaw set like stone. She was motionless, watching the village stir. And around her, the very air shimmered, like heat, like lightning, like power coiled just beneath the surface. A crackle danced across her collarbone, a tiny web of light, and the air snapped with it, as if the sky had never left her side. The first man to see her stumbled back, clutching his chest. "She's returned," he hissed. Someone else whispered, "No. That's not her. That's something wearing her skin." The elders gathered hurriedly in the center of the village, some half-dressed, others clutching prayer beads, none prepared for what they saw. Elder Tephu pushed through the crowd, eyes wide, sweat beading on his forehead despite the coolness of the rain-washed air. "She should be dead," he muttered. "She was meant to be taken." But she had not been taken. She had been changed. She stepped forward. And thunder rolled. Not from the sky, it was clear now, but from somewhere inside her. A low, humming vibration that traveled through the ground and up through the bones of every man, woman, and child watching. A hush fell. Birds in the trees stopped singing. Goats and chickens turned their heads and stilled. Even the flies seemed to pause mid-flight. A cat, thin and wild-eyed, slunk forward from the shadows and lay flat at her feet. And then the villagers, one by one, began to understand. This was no survivor. No lucky girl who had endured the storm. This was the storm returned in the shape of what they had tried to destroy. Arrow watched from the edge of the courtyard, his body stiff with shame. He could barely meet her eyes. He had not screamed for her. Had not fought for her. And now she walked before him not as the friend he'd sat beneath trees with, not as the girl who whispered to wind, but as something else. Something sovereign. He lowered his gaze. The elders stepped forward together, arms raised in cautious unity. Elder Tephu cleared his throat, voice quivering. This is not our doing. This is unnatural. We gave her to the rain to cleanse our sins, and now she returns, with power. This is a trick. A witch's disguise. Whispers rose in agreement, fear clinging to every word. She commands lightning. She did not die when she should have. She walks without blessing. Malika said nothing. She did not argue. She did not beg. Instead, she took another step. And again, thunder followed, a deep groan of the earth like something ancient shifting in its sleep. The elders stepped back. Some of the villagers dropped to their knees. Not in reverence, but because their legs could no longer carry the weight of what stood before them. Malika's eyes scanned them all. Her expression was unreadable. Not cruel, not vengeful. But vast. Like the sky before a storm, endless and unknowable. She looked at the faces of people who had spit at her, laughed at her, stripped her bare and called it sacred. She saw the children peeking from behind their mothers, too young to understand but old enough to feel the crackle of power in the air. And finally, her eyes found Arrow. He raised his head slowly. For a moment, something passed between them, recognition, sorrow, distance. His lips parted, as if to say her name. But he did not. He couldn't. He had lost the right to speak it. Still, she did not speak. She turned and began to walk through the village, her bare feet splashing in puddles, her shoulders dripping with the sky's remains. Wherever she passed, silence followed. No one moved. No one dared. A dog lay flat before her. A crow landed on the roof of the elder hut and let out a single, piercing call, then went silent. Even the trees tilted their branches as if bowing. She did not pause. She did not look back. She was no longer a girl. She was dressed in thunder. At first, they tried to pretend she hadn't changed. That Malika had merely survived something terrible, endured the wrath of the sky and returned whole but damaged. A ghost of the girl they had tried to offer, nothing more. They told themselves the lightning in her eyes was a trick of the light. The crackle in the air when she passed, coincidence. A trauma made her strange, they reasoned. The storm had touched her mind, not her soul. But then the signs began. The first to fall ill was Noma, the butcher's wife, a woman known for her cruel tongue. She had laughed the loudest when Malika was stripped, pointing and jeering, calling her sky slut as she was tied to the pole. Now, her skin blistered as if kissed by unseen heat. Her mouth swelled until she could no longer speak. No doctor, no healer could soothe her. She whispered Malika's name through cracked lips, as if saying it might earn her relief. It did not. Then came Goro, a man who once threw stones at Malika's grandmother's hut for harboring a curse. He woke one night to find every gourd of water in his home soured and black with rot. The roof over his bed collapsed under clear skies. His cattle wandered from their pens and were never seen again. His voice, once booming and proud, thinned to a hoarse rasp. It spread from there. Quiet and precise. Children of the unkind began waking with fevers. Chickens refused to lay eggs in certain yards. Winds tore through some homes but left the neighbors untouched. Rain visited Ngara again, but not equally. In the elders' fields, the rain fell in hesitant drops, then ceased altogether, as if the earth itself was denying them. But near the riverbank where Malika now walked daily, gathering herbs and stones, the soil bloomed with wildflowers and fresh shoots. People noticed. Fear replaced mockery. Eyes that once rolled in scorn now darted away quickly, or remained fixed on the ground when she passed. Some tried to bring her offerings, smoked fish, carved beads, even honey. She left them untouched. Not out of spite, but because she had no use for hollow regret. It was Arrow who broke first. He had watched everything unfold with a sinking weight in his chest. The friend he had failed was now something vast, something sacred, and he could no longer bear the silence between them. He found her one morning beside the edge of the river, her hands submerged in the current, eyes closed. The water danced around her fingers like it recognized them. He approached slowly. The wind didn't fight him. The river did not rise. "Malika," he said. She didn't open her eyes. "I should have stopped them," he continued. "I should have pulled you from that pole. I thought of it, I did. But I was afraid." Her hands stilled. The river grew still too. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. "I don't want forgiveness. I just want you to know I remember. Every second. Every scream. I remember the rain on your face. I remember how I didn't move. And I'm sorry. I will be sorry until the dirt swallows me." She opened her eyes. They were still silver. Still stormlit. But soft now, in a way he had not seen since they were children. "I gave you silence," she said, voice low, "when you gave me fear." He dropped to his knees. "I don't want your mercy," he whispered. She tilted her head. "I know," she said. "That's why you might deserve it." Then she stood, brushed the river from her palms, and walked away, leaving him in the water, humbled and alone. The village, meanwhile, had grown restless. Illness. Crop failure. Animals gone missing. Every misfortune became a reason to fear her more. Some whispered about binding her again. About another offering. But no one dared speak those thoughts aloud near the elders. Not now. The last time they'd tried to cleanse the land, it had risen in rebellion. So they did the only thing left to them, they begged. One by one, families came to the foot of the hill where Malika had begun building a small hut. It was a round, simple place, ringed with carved stones and strange symbols etched into the mud. Smoke from herbs curled through the air. The trees nearby had grown thick and dark, their leaves fuller than anywhere else in Gara. They knelt. They wept. They brought grain, cloth, oil, even songs. She watched them, standing still at the edge of her doorway, wrapped in a shawl made from animal hide and blue thread. Her hair was braided now, wrapped with twigs and beads. Her skin shone in the afternoon light. The elders came last. Elder Tephew, flanked by 2 others, bowed until his knees touched the earth. His voice trembled as he spoke. "We were wrong. We were afraid. The village is dying. We ask for grace." A long silence followed. Malika stepped forward. She looked over them all, not with anger, not with glee, but with something deeper. Disappointment. Pity. A kind of quiet, sharpened grief. Her voice was calm. "I was naked," she said. "You called it tradition." She took a step. "I was bound. You called it honor." Another step. "I was given to the storm. You called it sacrifice." She stopped before Elder Tephew, who couldn't meet her eyes. "I wear thunder now," she whispered. "You cannot undress me again." No one spoke. No one moved. And then she turned, disappearing into the green-shaded doorway of her home, leaving the village to kneel under a sky that no longer listened to their prayers. She left without ceremony. No drums, no chants, no parting words. One morning, she simply walked, past the fields that now dared not bloom without her will, past the wells that held their breath when she passed, and up toward the mountains that had always loomed beyond Ngara, silent and waiting. She walked barefoot, her skin cloaked in mist, her eyes still carrying the silver sheen of stormlight. The trees bowed. The birds watched. The air hummed. And when she vanished into the peaks, the village exhaled, not in relief, but in reverent fear. They did not chase her. No one would dare. The last time they tried to own her, she returned wearing thunder. Now, she belonged to the sky. In the months that followed, stories drifted down the mountain paths like fog. A shepherd swore he saw her standing on a cliff, arms raised as lightning crawled around her like obedient wolves. A merchant from the west claimed she turned away a monsoon with a single gesture. A traveler whispered that he watched her walk across a lake without sinking. Her reflection shimmered, but left no ripples. They called her many things. Goddess. Witch. Ghost. Some said she'd become the storm itself, no longer bound by flesh or form, just a voice carried on wind, watching, listening, waiting. Others insisted she was building something high in the peaks, a sanctuary for the broken and cast out, a place where silence was sacred and rage was taught to sing. Back in Ngara, the village carried on, quieter, slower, different. No one forgot. The rain still came, but not always when asked. Sometimes it passed over the elders' fields entirely, settling instead on the edges of town, where wildflowers grew thick and uninvited. Roofs that once leaked now held strong, but only over homes where laughter was shared, where kindness lived. No one mocked the strange anymore. No child was turned away for asking odd questions or wandering off alone. Grandmothers told new stories. Parents whispered before bed, "Be kind to the quiet ones. Share with those who speak to wind. Respect the girl who walks alone, for the storm may still love her." And when thunder rolled low in the distance, some villagers bowed their heads. Arrow left a few weeks after her disappearance. He didn't say goodbye. He packed his tools, kissed his mother's forehead, and walked the same path she had. Not to follow her, he knew she could not be followed, but to do what little he could. In the foothills, he built a small shrine. A circle of stones. A woven roof. A single bowl carved from smooth white clay, for rainwater only. No idol, no painting. Just a name etched into the earth beside it. Malika. He slept there for many nights, speaking to the sky, waiting for dreams. When no answers came, he accepted them as forgiveness. Children visit the shrine now. They bring offerings, feathers, poems, seeds wrapped in leaves. Sometimes, they say they feel her nearby, watching from the cliffs above. They call her she who stayed dry in the storm, or the woman with silver eyes. But most just call her Malika, softly, as if speaking her name too loud might wake the lightning. Her story is no longer just a memory. It is a lesson. A warning. A prayer. When drought returns, elders kneel and whisper, not to gods, but to her. When someone is mocked, a mother hisses, remember Malika. The rain listens. When thunder speaks, the village falls silent. And when the sky flashes with silver light, they do not hide. They open their windows. And wait. Years move through Ngara like wind through tall grass, bending what stood, softening what was once sharp. The old ways loosened their grip, and with time, the village began to reshape itself. Huts were rebuilt wider and stronger. New crops took root in soil once deemed too stubborn. The children who had once watched Malika from behind their mother's skirts were now grown, with little ones of their own. They spoke of her not with fear, but with awe, not as a warning, but as a promise. The elders who had led the ritual, who had tied her to a pole and dared call it holy, did not live to see the world they made. One by one, they faded, their names whispered with discomfort and buried without fanfare. Their stories became quiet footnotes in the margins of the village's retelling. Ngara changed. When a second great drought arrived, years after Malika vanished into the mountains, the land cracked again, and the air grew dry and sharp. Crops wilted, wells lowered. Fear returned, but it did not twist itself into the shape of a sacrifice this time. There were no councils. No whispers of cursed names. No drums. Instead, the people gathered in the open, beneath the scorching sky, and told stories. They told of a girl who was tied beneath a storm and came back clothed in lightning. They told of silver eyes, of a voice that spoke to clouds and feet that woke thunder. They remembered not only the miracles but the pain, the cold, bare truth of what had been done to her. And so, when a new child was born on a night thick with wind and flashing skies, no one turned their back. The midwife wrapped the girl in blue cloth and held her to the rain as it began to fall softly, gently, as though the sky was watching. They named her Inari, meaning gift. She grew strong. She laughed often. And when she wandered off to speak with the river or sing to the clouds, no one stopped her. They left offerings by the shrine. They kept silence when thunder rolled. They waited for her to bloom. And then, one morning, she returned. Malika. Older now. Taller. The lines of time faint on her face, but her posture still as straight as a storm-bent tree. Her hair was longer, streaked with gray that glimmered like lightning in the sunlight. Her eyes still shimmered silver, but softer now, less like weapons, more like windows to something vast and deep. She came not with thunder cracking behind her, but with mist curling around her feet. The villagers saw her first from afar, standing at the path between the trees and the fields. She waited. Not because she needed permission, but because she wanted to see who would come. They did. One by one, they left their homes and walked to her, not kneeling, not weeping, but standing. Still. Open. Arrow was there, older too, his beard full, his eyes tired but kind. He stepped forward, carrying a bowl of fresh water from the shrine. He offered it with both hands. She took it. Drank. Nodded. Then she walked through the village once more. But now, the air did not crackle with tension. The birds did not still. The goats did not bow. Everything moved around her as though it had been waiting. She stopped beside the well and pressed her hand to the stone. Rain fell within the hour. She visited the small schoolhouse where children traced her name into clay and called her the first thunder. She sat with them, listening to their questions, letting them touch her hand, watching their wide eyes fill with wonder and not fear. And then she stood before Inari. The girl looked up at her, unblinking. "You are not afraid of storms?" Malika asked. "No," the girl whispered. "I think they sound like you." Malika smiled. And she reached out, placing her hand on the girl's forehead. Energy passed between them, invisible but deep. The sky above brightened. The trees leaned closer. The earth exhaled. Later, when the villagers asked why she had come back, Malika gave no speeches. She only said, "You remembered my pain. You did not hide it. You made room for it in your stories. That is why I bless you." She stayed one more night, sleeping under open sky, the way she had as a girl. And by morning, she was gone again, vanishing into mist. But the drought broke within days. And the people of Ngara learned once and for all. She had not been cursed. She had become the storm. At the edge of the world, where trees grow taller than memory and clouds kiss the ground like old lovers, a hut stands alone. It leans slightly to the left, made of stone, vine, and old branches, simple, silent, shaped by time and weather. Smoke curls gently from its roof in the mornings, and birds nest in its rafters without fear. Inside lives a woman. Her skin is dark and worn smooth by wind and rain. Her hair is long, streaked with silver and bound in loose braids. Her fingers, bent slightly at the joints, bear scars like lightning etched down their lengths, glowing faintly in moonlight. She moves slowly now, not from weakness, but from knowing the world does not need to be rushed. Malika. She no longer walks with thunder at her heels. She no longer glows. Her eyes, still silver in the right light, carry a calm that once only belonged to the center of a storm. She does not speak to clouds anymore. She does not need to. The sky remembers her. Each day, she kneels in the soft earth behind her hut and draws stories in the mud. Spirals, symbols, paths, stories the rain will erase by nightfall. She writes not to keep them, but to set them free. Sometimes, children find their way to her. They come barefoot, with wide eyes and bundles of questions. One morning, as mist wraps the trees and the air hangs heavy with quiet promise, a girl no older than 7 appears at her door. She carries a stick like a staff and wears a crown of woven grass. "Are you the Thunder Woman?" the child asks, staring without fear. Malika looks up from the earth. Smiles gently. "No," she says. "I was just a girl once." The child tilts her head. "But you talk to storms." Malika chuckles, soft, deep, the kind of laugh that can crack the sky if asked. "No," she says again, "the storm talked to me. And when no one else would raise me, it did." The girl nods, satisfied, and runs off, arms spread wide, chasing wind. Malika returns to her drawings. Outside, the air shifts. A breeze curls around the trees. The leaves tremble. And then, gently, it begins, a rain that is soft as breath, warm as a remembered touch. It falls not to punish, not to cleanse, but simply to exist. She lifts her face to it, eyes closed. She no longer weeps. She does not need to. The sky has wept enough for her.